kids here, Brian, and there are plans to expand
indoctrination.
That's right.
Well, Idahoans are also concerned.
Horror shot.
That line would be moving a little bit farther west.
I'm like crying.
Nobody wants to see
Dark money is influencing policy in our state.
Well, that's not how this works.
Well, hello there, and welcome to Nowhere to Hide. I'm Brian Hyde, and my job is twice a week to call out some of the more egregious examples of bias and narrative in Idaho's legacy media. And thankfully, it's always a target-rich environment. It's like there's plenty of job security in terms of finding examples to share with you. Our theme today is solutions in search of problems. To be more specific, left-wing solutions in search of problems by which they can then be imposed. Now, it was just last week that there was great weeping, wailing, and gnashing of teeth as Brandon Durst was appointed to become the superintendent in the West Bonner County School District. And I don't really know a great deal about Brandon, so it's not like I can speak from experience. Oh, yes, well, I know all about him. But if everything I knew about him was coming from the press, I would have to be very alarmed. And that's really the message that has been put out is, how could this be? I can only assume that panic, at least on the part of the leftists within the legacy media, comes from the fact that Brandon has worked with the Idaho Freedom Foundation. He apparently has pretty solid conservative credentials and is not interested in just business as usual. Basically, what does the teachers union want me to do when it comes to running this school district? They've gone through quite a number of superintendents in just the last little bit. But I want you to see, starting with a wonderful hatchet job from none other than Brian Holmes from KTVB. This is pretty typical for him. There is cautious optimism that somehow Brandon Durst might be denied that superintendent appointment. But you got to check out some of the convoluted reasoning behind the celebrating. So here we go. The headline says West Bonner County School District may rescind Brandon Durst's superintendent appointment. The move can be attributed to what happened at last night's school board meeting. Now, as he starts the article, Brian goes into some detail about 5 superintendents who've been named since March of 2022. And he says there could be 6 by tomorrow. KTVB was sent the agenda for the meeting scheduled for tomorrow. First item under new business is consideration of and approval of rescinding the selection of superintendent candidate. Now, this shouldn't come as a big surprise in the sense that there was some pretty serious activism going on within members of the media. I'll be sharing more on that in just a few moments. But what they're getting at here is that it looks like the board might take back Brandon Durst's appointment to run their district. And Brian Holmes says this could be attributed to what happened in last night's West Bonner County Special School District School Board meeting, rather. So about 50 people showed up. He says that's not the most they've seen, but probably the most vocal. And there was a large outburst from the attendees right after they read out the benefits. Look at those scare quotes, benefits that Durst was asking for in his superintendent contract. And that's in addition to the $105,000 salary. Now, he asked for the following things: 12 sick days, 20 vacation days to be paid for any unused vacation days, use of a car that's less than 10 years old, the district to pay for half of his Percy retirement contribution, to work remotely, a housing allowance of $500 a month, $2,000 in moving expenses, and he wanted to be able to eat lunch at any school in the district for free. Now, I would ask you to remember that these are things he's asking for. So they had not been approved yet. This was not a slam dunk fait accompli. When you are starting a position or when you are applying for a position or negotiating to fill a position, that's what you do. You put things on the table and say, this is what I would like. This is what would make it worth my while to undertake this position. Okay, nothing more. Now, you may think, well, why would he ask for all those things? And there's a very simple rule for this, because you don't get anything that you don't ask for. Okay, what's the worst that can happen? Well, they say no. But if you ask for it, and if, the folks in charge are willing, you might be surprised what you could get. Really, you might even consider trying it sometime. Nonetheless, there's a lot of feigned outrage. Well, how could he ask for it on top of a $105,000 salary? We'll get to that in just a few moments. Now, Durst also wanted to be able to keep his consulting and speaking engagements, and he wanted he and his wife to be protected from any lawsuits brought against him as superintendent. And if he were to be fired, he wanted it to require a supermajority of the board vote instead of a simple majority. During the 4-hour-long meeting last night, trustees decided to go over the contract request line by line, and while they were doing that, the meeting became more heated. Now, this is soft pedaling on Brian Holmes' part. The meeting became more heated. Okay, what if it was parents protesting, some perverted book that was in the library available to their kids, or some LGBT, agenda item that had somehow found its way into their classroom? Hey, kids, we're all going to wear these rainbow ribbons, in solidarity with Pride Month, or whatever it may be. Would he be so deferential to the people? Well, this is perfectly understandable that there would be this outburst. Or would it be, well, the children are getting out of control, and thank goodness we have adults in charge? It sounds like it was a pretty rancorous meeting. And my point here is just simply, I'm not saying that's always a good thing or even a bad thing, but what an interesting double standard. If parents speak up and if parents get angry because they're being minimalized or marginalized by board members, well, that's a terrible thing, and it just shows, why our safety is at stake here, and we hear similar reactions. But in this case, why it was perfectly natural and probably, well-founded, or so we're supposed to believe. Anyway, moving on to some of the complaints. That money comes from the children. It comes straight out of these parents' pockets, someone can be heard yelling. Really? If those children aren't taxpayers, then I think I would walk that one back pretty quickly. And as far as it coming straight from the parents' pockets, so does every other government policy that is enacted and carried out in the state of Idaho. Do we really need to go back to Civics 101 to understand this? A teacher from the school district was also in attendance. Her name is Whitney Ehrman. It was definitely a fiery meeting, she said. They were not prepared for us to be vocal. Oh, it was the teachers. Interesting. And have actual information to combat them. I mean, they've gotten away with a lot in the last year and a half where there hasn't been a lot of pushback. Now, there's not much context explaining what exactly was they, I assume that's the school board, what have they got away with? And what is the pushback? And what exactly are the teachers after? I mean, teachers' unions can be a very formidable lobbying presence, but, the story here leaves us wondering what exactly was the problem. Ehrman said it stayed intense the whole night with audience members complaining about how the district's budget is already tight. Wow, that's the first time I've ever heard complaints that, hey, where schools are concerned or where education is concerned, we shouldn't spend more money. But there it was. The meeting went on for 4 hours with two of the trustees last week who voted for Durst just getting up and walking out at about the 3-hour mark. Now, why would they do that? Maybe they recognized that this was a setup for, a political action rally, and they just decided, I'm not going to be a part of that. Now, prior to that, the board had managed to run a red pen through Durst's contract addendum. That's a fairly harshly spun way of saying, so there were things they reviewed that they said, no, we can't do that. So the board reduced his vacation days from 20 to 15. They denied the request of a car, denied the half the Percy contribution, his ability to work remotely, and the $500 monthly allowance, the moving expenses, and the free meals at schools. Okay, that's part of negotiation. You can ask for it, but maybe they decide no. It wasn't like, they've saved us because he was going to spend money that we just don't have. In addition, one of the requirements for Durst to get the district job or any superintendent job in Idaho, he has to have 4 years of full-time certified experience working with students while under contract with an accredited school, which Durst doesn't have. However, one of the conditions for Durst to get the job, and according to the board chair, Durst is going to apply for, is an emergency provisional certificate with the State Board of Education. Now, to get that provisional certificate, Idaho law requires no less than 2 years of college training as a teacher and to have a current Idaho certificate. Okay, seems fair enough. But again, these are badges of compliance more so than proof of competency or, essential information. This is not like he's an anesthesiologist and they want to know, did you actually go to medical school? No. So Durst doesn't appear to have the accreditation that they're looking for. Now, he does have a degree in political science. He has a master's degree in public administration, but no training or experience at get this with an accredited school, meaning in a school that has been approved by those who are in power and those who have the lobbying clout. Again, there is nothing there to indicate that, well, he's some kind of a snake oil salesman. So Brian Holmes supposes, perhaps wishes, with fingers crossed, even that provisional certificate seems up in the air. And then he makes this very interesting tie-in, saying, well, additionally, last October, when Durst was running for state superintendent, the chair of Boise State College of Education, Boise State's College of Education, Heather Williams, where Durst got his master's degree, wrote a letter concerning Durst's qualifications for the job. According to sources found by KTVB, the letter was emailed to the board by several hundred of West Bonner County School District's parents, which the chair claimed he didn't know about until after he voted for Durst as his new superintendent. Now, apparently, regarding his, that requirement would have applied to the state superintendent. I don't know if that applies to individual, district superintendents, but note the subtle, hundreds of parents. Well, there's only 1,000 students in the district, so hundreds of parents had sent this out. Okay, there were some people who definitely are activists. It could be more than 100. But the impression that's being given here is that, boy, it was this overwhelming majority of parents who sent that out there. And boy, they don't want Brandon Durst in there. Now, regarding his salary request, Durst took to Twitter back in May and stated that at no time in Idaho history have school districts had access to more money. From tens of millions of dollars in COVID funds to a new infusion of over $450 million in new state support, districts are swimming in cash. This doesn't even mention the slush funds or the rainy day funds that many of them keep in order to, have necessary funding. Asking patrons, this is what Durst said, asking patrons who are drowning in property tax bills to fork over more of their hard-earned money is both unnecessary and in some cases unethical. Now, I'm sure that Mr. Holmes views this as a gotcha. See, he's asking for money instead of working for free after he talked about how the parents and the taxpayers are being put upon and, the schools have so much money. But think about this for a second. If the schools really have access to that money, and they got hundreds of millions of dollars after the last legislative session, is this really an outrageous request on the part of Fred Durst? Now, he was tweeting about school bonds and levies that were voted on back in May, and that levy was voted down. However, according to Brian Holmes, that could apply to his contract request. I'm not sure exactly how, and explain why he asked for a six-figure salary and all the addendums. Now, what is the going salary? What were the previous superintendents paid? Because that doesn't say $105,000 doesn't seem out of the question. That seems actually for administrators, must be a pretty small district if that's all that is. Now, Ehrman, remember her, the teacher from earlier on? Well, she's actually losing her job because her salary was tied to the levy. So here we have our victim. Well, see, while Brandon Durst is going to be getting rich off the taxpayers, at least according to Brian Holmes, Ehrman, this brave, noble teacher who failed to get more access to the taxpayer's pocket, or so it's being implied here, is going to lose her job. So I guess this is supposed to show us that Durst is completely out of line for asking for the compensation package that he asked for. And then it points out here in the story, Brian Holmes says, look, he's asking for $105,000 as a superintendent who oversees a district of just about 1,000 students. But again, what are comparable districts paying in the state? Is that necessarily the outrage that we're supposed to think it is, or is this, a tempest in a teapot? I'm kind of inclined to lean toward the latter just because of the source and because of other examples of contrived outrage that seem to come up in this story. Now, Brian Holmes does point out the superintendent of the West Ada School District, which has about 40,000 students, Derek Bubb, makes $210,000 a year, and getting six figures isn't unheard of, even in Idaho, even in districts comparable to West Bonner County. So why is it a big deal then? I can tell you why it's a big deal. It's because the left, including members of the legacy media, do not want to see someone who doesn't have leftist ideals, hasn't passed their litmus test, their purity test hasn't been administered, or he's failed their purity test as to will he be dogmatic and can be counted on to play the game the way they would like. Now, to me, that's actually in Mr. Durst's credit that they're upset about this. But the idea is, they didn't want him to have that position in the first place. What if he says no to the latest leftist imperative that comes down the path? Now, as further proof that the media has really taken a hard line, look at this juicy little editorial from the Boise Statesman. I'm sorry, did I say Statesman? I meant the Hatesman. Long a power seeker, Brandon Durst now has his own little kingdom in North Idaho. Now, tell us how you really feel. Would they ever apply that same standard? They being the Statesman editorial board. Would they ever apply that to anybody on the political left? Long a power seeker. The truth is there's a lot of power seeking going on out there. And here's the difference, at least in terms of Brandon Durst. If, in fact, his conservative credentials are solid, they appear to be. People who know him well say, no, this guy is solid on his principles. Then seeking power really isn't what he's not trying to grow government to benefit himself. But in fact, he could actually interfere with leftists who are in the game, so to speak, who have their hands on those government levers because they are trying to manipulate those levers to their advantage. They're building their own little fiefdoms. How dare he interfere with that? How dare he offer an alternative to parents who apparently were quite supportive? Brian Holmes mentions the hundreds of parents who sent this notification. He may not have the proper qualifications. There were also hundreds of letters that were sent to the school district saying this is the guy we want. So I guess we'll watch it. We'll know after the meeting today, but it would be a shame to see him, kicked out of this just because of political activism. But if nothing else, it shows you just how overtly politicized the schools have become. And why would they want to keep somebody with more of a traditional limited government point of view from being in charge of a particular school district? Well, I have an idea, and it might have something to do with another solution that's looking for a problem, that being, intolerance and inclusivity and diversity and so forth. Great article by Wayne Hoffman at idahofreedom.org. As Idaho law gives advantages to leftist union organizations, the NEA develops a new gender toolkit. Now, this is important because this affects the kind of schooling and the kind of indoctrination that will be taking place in these government-run schools. Wayne asks, why do Idaho's politicians keep allowing the leftist National Education Association, or NEA, to have special rights to control Idaho's government-run schools? Since 1971, the state of Idaho has afforded collective bargaining rights to school labor unions. That's the chief beneficiary of which would be the Idaho Education Association. That's the NEA's Idaho affiliate. In recent years, this lucrative arrangement for teachers has drawn too little scrutiny, as the NEA has become visibly more and more Marxist. He's not just name-calling. I mean, they literally have been embracing more and more Marxist dogma, including critical race theory, though they call it something different. I think it's emotional social learning and so forth. Anyway, this organization has become a leading cheerleader for critical race theory. Now the NEA has unveiled a new gender toolkit that includes recommendations for LGBT-themed books and guidelines for pronoun usage. Because, our kids aren't really learning unless they're learning, all about the rainbow. Inspire and engage your students, says the NEA's selection of LGBT books. The organization's website says. The website gives teachers a list of books, some of which are found in Idaho's government schools, as has already been reported by the Idaho Freedom Foundation. Now, the group encourages teachers not to assume anyone's gender and describes a scenario in which a teacher might go around the room and engage others in revealing their own pronouns. Doesn't that sound like it's planting some seeds? Addressing someone by the wrong name or misgendering them through the use of incorrect pronouns can feel disrespectful, harmful, and even unsafe to the person being misgendered, the toolkit says. Misgendering results in marginalization and communicates that a person's identity is not being seen or respected. Yeah, another way to put that, it might alarm some people if you don't play along with their pretend fantasy. So practice using the pronouns a transgender or non-binary person requests. Yes, even plural they. It's a show of respect. Oh, to depart from reality, yes, and to make a mockery of the English language, why, you're showing respect. You're also showing that you're easily manipulated and possibly brainwashed. If we want to get out of the habit of assuming pronouns, we need to learn and let people introduce their pronouns. Role model your pronouns before inviting everyone to introduce theirs. Hi, my name is Meg, and I use she, her, hers pronouns. Could everyone please go around and share their name and pronouns, the NEA advises. By the way, the toolkit also offers sie, zim, and zir as pronouns that teachers might use. Isn't it charming? Now, bear in mind, Wayne says, in Idaho, only teachers and firefighters have collective bargaining rights. School boards and city councils are required to negotiate labor contracts with them. Police officers don't have the same standing. Some municipalities negotiate contracts with law enforcement, but they're not compelled by state law to do so. In the Republican-controlled legislature, efforts to give school boards some modicum of control, that is, to decide whether or not to negotiate with leftist unions, have failed. As surprising as that might sound, The most recent effort was in 2021 when the Senate Education Committee rejected a House-passed bill that said school boards may, instead of shall, negotiate a contract with a labor union. By the way, that one came down to one vote. You might be wondering which senator was that? Well, you'll have to read the article to find out. Understand that when the Idaho Education Association is given this kind of power, some of the money teachers pay in union dues goes to the NEA. Then the NEA turns around and spends that money to develop and promote toolkits, just like the one it just unveiled. So it's utterly implausible that somehow the NEA's leftism isn't seeping into Idaho's school system, or that Idaho teachers have not, through the IEA, paid to put it there. The question that remains is how long Idaho lawmakers will continue to facilitate our own demise and the miseducation of our kids by affording special rights to the NEA and its Idaho affiliate. Now, maybe that seems a little harsh. I don't think it is, considering what's at stake. When you consider that the advances that are being made right now in terms of left-wing dogma and the whole woke ideology that is creeping into schools as fast as it can, yeah, the kids are under very constant attack. It was actually kind of encouraging to read about a school in, I believe it was Burlington, Vermont, just in the last week. There was a little bit of an uprising of sorts. Now, I believe these were grade school kids, but they were refusing to put on the ribbon. I mean, this is right out of the Seinfeld episode. You won't wear the ribbon? Okay, well, these kids didn't want to wear a rainbow ribbon. They didn't want to, prance around, celebrating gay pride. Now, that doesn't mean these kids are haters, but to hear the school administrators and the various Karens who, were commenting, oh, this is so unacceptable. We cannot have this kind of intolerance in our school district. I mean, for crying out loud, I thought the whole theme of Pride was, I can love whoever I love. So what if one of the kids says, well, I love Jesus? Now you're going to see some real intolerance. Now you're going to see what intolerance is all about. Speaking of intolerance, you'll be glad to know that we're now getting a little help from the federal government here in the state of Idaho to help protect civil rights and to combat hate. Idaho will soon have a federal attorney whose job is to protect civil rights and combat hate. I think Audrey Dutton misspelled commissar. We'll have a federal commissar whose job is to help protect civil rights and combat hate. This attorney will focus on civil rights and hate crimes, two priorities of the U.S. Attorney's Office. Well, let's take a look into this article and see, is it really necessary? Is this another solution looking for a problem? The team of Idaho attorneys who work on behalf of the federal government will soon include a civil rights lawyer, a role that hasn't existed before. Now, you might ask yourself, why is that? Given the woke direction that things have been going, it almost makes me wonder if this is an invented position for an invented solution to a problem they still haven't been able to pin down. Hate crimes and civil rights violations are two of the areas Idaho's U.S. Attorney Josh Hurwitz said his office would focus on after Hurwitz was appointed by President Joe Biden last year. Yes, the same President Joe Biden who, in an effort to honor LGBTQ and some various trans individuals at the White House earlier this week, ended up hosting something like a Greek frat party with bare boobs bouncing around at the White House. I just would remind you of this, not because, it's just fun to share lurid details, but this was the same guy who just, a couple of years back was running on the platform of, I am here to restore decency and honor to the office of the presidency. How's he doing on that? Whatever flaws Donald Trump had, I don't think a bunch of half-dressed trannies with, nakedness was really kind of a normal thing that was going on at the White House. All right, nevertheless, Idaho's going to be getting some help, and we're going to get it good and hard. Hurwitz and other federal district attorneys around the nation have rolled out a program they call United Against Hate, an initiative to bring together law enforcement, community leaders, and others to more effectively combat what they call hate crimes and violence. In my view, this initiative is particularly timely for Idaho, as we've experienced a series of troubling hate incidents throughout the state in the past several years. That's what Hurwitz said in a news release earlier this year. Notice again the lack of a specified predicate here. What exactly does he mean by hate? I know there were a couple of examples of, well, someone said a slur. Yeah, some people have bad communication skills, or they speak out or pop off in a way that doesn't necessarily constitute a crime. Frankly, I think if you can find anybody and ask them, hey, have you ever said the N-word out loud? Most people, especially public figures, will tell you, well, of course not. Of course I haven't. Somebody tells you that, laugh in their face, because they have. Everybody has. And that doesn't make it right. It's just an acknowledgement that someone popping off or speaking inappropriately isn't necessarily a hater, on the same par as, some Aryan Nation skinhead or Ku Klux Klan member, or the Black Hebrew Israelites, who are another hate group out there. They just have a slightly different pigmentation. All right, nevertheless, back to the article here. This month, the U.S. Department of Justice began taking applications for an attorney, that's commissar, who will focus on enforcing civil rights in Idaho. The application deadline is June 20th. This new position will protect the civil rights and constitutional rights. Now, if you remember, in the last episode, we talked about the difference between civil rights and natural rights. I don't even like the term constitutional rights. Natural rights limit government's power over you. Civil rights increase your obligations to government. In other words, they increase government power over you in the form of obligations. But purportedly, this new position, this commissar, will protect the rights of all persons in the District of Idaho through criminal prosecution, civil enforcement, and community outreach. The criminal component of this position will involve prosecuting civil rights crimes in federal court, including but not limited to hate crimes and excessive force violations by law enforcement. They're gonna use enough government force, with enough government and enough programs. We are going to make people like each other and get along to where, the brothers and the clan will be dancing arm in arm in the streets of Harlem. No, it's not going to happen. And it's not going to happen because, racism is good. It's not going to happen because forced association is forced. People don't want to be forced. All it does is create deeper resentments, more reasons for division, more dividing people up into, well, now you're this group and you're in this group. You guys get together. Now kiss. People will sort out whom they are comfortable with. They will sort out the people that they want to hang around. And sometimes they're going to say, I'm really not comfortable hanging with these folks or this person or that individual or this community. That's their right. As long as their behavior is peaceful, I don't care what's going on in their head. I don't care what they might be thinking in their hearts. It's their right. It's their prerogative to do so. And left to sort it out for themselves, you will find that people have this incredible way of finding common ground, of being able to set aside differences. But when you try to force them together, you put some commissar over them and prosecute them if they say or do something that, and the definitions are always shifting, right? The kids who wouldn't wear their rainbow flags at that school in Burlington, Vermont, they were talking about it like it's a hate crime. The new thing for Pride Month is we're going to paint these crosswalks in the rainbow colors. Well, guess what? Some people, when they see something, a political statement right there in the road, just can't resist resorting to lighting up their tires. They will do a burnout across it, which is now considered a hate crime. I don't know. I see a lot of tire tracks in places where there is no flag painted on the pavement. Is that a hate crime too, or is that just, reckless driving? It's a solution that's looking for a problem, and unfortunately, there are a lot of people who are very willing to impose it. This little chart of this political compass helps to explain why, and why the media reports it with such vim and vigor. This is the modern leftist's political compass. Yes, that is love and hope up there in the far upper left authoritarian corner. Everything that's not in that corner, as you can see, is the far right. So when you hear them talking about how the far right this and the far right that, that's the kind of stuff that we're talking about here. Look, you're not going to appease folks who are pushing this far left agenda. You don't need their approval. What you need to do is be strong enough to either laugh in their faces or simply tell them, no, thank you, withdraw your consent, and let them go on stewing about whatever it is they're stewing about. It seems like a rather unneighborly thing, and they will cry and they will whine and beg, but it's still the right thing to do. Don't be bullied into accepting things that really are not acceptable. I'm Brian Hyde, and this is Nowhere to Hide.
Are biased, the Idaho Press Club are biased, all media, newspaper, radio.
To be completely blunt here, Brian, and there are plans to expand
indoctrination.
That's right.
Idahoans are also concerned.
Horror shot.
That line would be moving a little bit farther west.
I'm like crying.
Nobody wants to see.
Dark money is influencing policy in our state.
Well, that's not how this